We have Todd Elliott with us today. Todd has had an illustrious career in the CPG world, and I have the pleasure of calling him one of my mentors and a former boss. I used to be on his team. Todd, we're very happy to have you here today to talk about, where you've been and how you got there. So I'll start right there. How did you make it to where you are today and achieve all the things that you did in your career?
Well, and thanks for that question. I would say, first of all, by the grace of God, I guess, it's been a long journey, but life is a long journey, right? And you surely don't get there on your own, right? I hear that. I'm trying to think who it was, but there's an individual that has a picture in his office of a turtle sitting on top of a fence post. And people ask him, "What's that all about?" He goes, "Well, one thing you know for sure about that turtle, he didn't get there by himself." Right. Well, I'd say that's true of me and my career, probably true of most people that have had any level of success. But, I've had a lot of help along the way, certainly from my wife and my family. I certainly have had help from a lot of mentors and coaches, a lot of hardworking people that were part of my teams. I would say probably a lot of help from a lot of folks. And also, I think just sticking to it, right? I mean, there are days when you don't feel like going in, you don't feel like working hard. But if you keep your nose to the grindstone, even in those tough times, the good times are even better. And, you look for opportunities. You look for ways to better yourself and to grow your skill set. And if you take advantage of those things, then you slowly begin to build value. And people are looking for others that are valuable, that have something to offer, right? So you try to be that person. You try to learn those things that are going to be valuable to others. So I'd say that's in a nutshell, I guess, in part, how I've been as successful as I've been, if you want to call it that.
I would certainly call it that. Do you think you could take us down that path that you walked? Tell us about your journey, where you started,
Sure.
and where you've been and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, sure. I think probably even as a kid, I mean, I was always competitive, loved sports. And you might say I'm a type A personality. I will say that I was probably a little bit on the quieter side, but that changed really, I think, primarily probably once I got to college. I went to school at Ohio State. And then after graduation, I took my first job as a sales guy, working for a company called Owens Corning Fiberglass. And I learned a lot about, interacting with people. It kind of brought me out of my shell. And so a lot of my career, I think you're aware, was at PepsiCo. So I had a lot of opportunity there at PepsiCo. My wife and I moved to California, took a role with Pepsi there in a sales position, and then worked my way up through sales roles and key account jobs, and then managerial roles, and then, leadership positions over time, all the way up to vice president. And so, the journey was one that kind of was sequential. I mean, bottom line, as I said before, I think what happened was I learned, how to be a good salesperson. And that helped me to understand what it takes to be successful in that role. But in doing that, you're kind of like a jack of all trades. You're sort of the individual within the company that is the face of the company to the customer. So you have to interact with a lot of different teams, right? Operations when deliveries aren't going well, and marketing when you've got a customer that's looking for something different or a plan to grow their business, and and finance, because you do a deal and you got to make sure it's going to be financially sound. So I'd say that role and those roles, a lot of people say, I say to people, "Hey, have you ever considered a career in sales?" And they say, "Gosh, no, I don't want to do that. I don't think I'd be good at it. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing I want to do." And I think they misunderstand it, right? I mean, when you're in sales, you really are playing a very important role for the company, and nothing happens till you sell something, right? Ultimately. So I think probably taking that career path was helpful. Along the way, I was able to be a general manager for a while and run a couple of facilities and manage a lot of people, had a teams, into the hundreds, and that's a whole different skill set. I mean, it's one thing to be an individual performer. It's another thing to lead teams. And so I had to learn what that was like and learn those skills. I was blessed that I had a lot of men and women around me that knew very well how to do that. And by emulating some of them, asking them for their help and digging into what made them successful, I was able to glean onto some of that and use it in my own career. So I guess that's, kind of the path I've taken. And it's been a good one. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks for that, Todd. It sounds like a key theme in your career has been leadership, and especially in our perspective, when I was working with you on your team at PepsiCo and we fought a lot of battles, your leadership is what inspired me a lot. So could you talk a little bit about what leadership specifically means to you, how you stood on the shoulders of giants like that turtle getting up on the fence that you mentioned, and what being a
Right.
servant leader means to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think so leadership, I mean, some people say you're born a leader. I don't think so. I think there are certain characteristics that play well into it. I think confidence I mentioned earlier is important. I think and a desire to be successful. Those things are important. So you have to have that internal fortitude, I think, to some degree, to be a good leader. But really, you can have all those things and be a horrible leader, right? I think what it comes down to is when you say you're leading, typically what it means is you're leading people, right? So you have to understand people. You have to know what makes them tick. You have to be able to discern the difference between someone that is going to do a good job and someone that maybe won't do as good a job. So part of the key to leadership, I'd say, is people, right? And I've often said it's all about the people. And that's true. I think it's a matter of, as Jim Collins says, picking the right people to get on the bus and then putting them in the right seat. So I would tell you that when I was successful was in large part because I made the right people moves, got the right people on board, and I tried to find people that were leadable as well, right? Those that certainly had their own desires and they had their own level of confidence, but also would honor and respect, the leadership of someone that maybe knows more than they do because they've been around a little bit longer. So you got to get the right folks on the bus. Then you got to get them into the right seats and making sure that they're doing the right stuff, right? So first, it's getting the right people. Then I think what's really important to be a good leader is your people need to know what you want from them. It's got to be clear. What are the expectations? And it's as simple as that sounds. It's not always the way people operate, right? There are many leaders out there that are fairly vague about that. They may not know themselves. That'd be the first problem. As a leader, you have to have vision. You really have to know where you're going, and otherwise, any road will take you there, as they say. But so once you've developed this vision and the strategy and tactics that go with it, you got to bring your people into the tent, and you got to be clear about what you want from them, right? So once they understand better what the expectations are, by giving them really kind of what you want them to do, which is really the knowledge, and then how you want them to do it, which is skill. You help them to build those skills. And then finally, I think this is important. It gets missed a lot. It's why you want them to do it. What's the outcome you're looking for? That's what really drives success. It builds attitude, right? It gets people focused in the right way for the right things. And they're looking for the same outcomes you are. So now you got the right people. They've got clear mission. And the next thing is really holding them accountable. I think if you hold people accountable, it's funny too, because I think in this society, sometimes people think of accountability as a bad thing. It's a bad word, right? It's like, I'm held accountable to this. Well, what I'll tell you is good people that work hard and do well want to be held accountable. They like it, right? So the best people take accountability seriously, and accountability is a good thing for them. They realize it's through accountability that they can rise to the top. They can get ahead in life, right? So that's key, right? So making sure that people are accountable. I'd say part of that is setting clear goals. Measuring them often, right? If people are off track, it's getting them back on track again. You got to recalibrate, keep them on track again. And then I would tell you that when they're successful, you want to praise them. You want to praise them publicly. It's a good thing to do. And others see that, and then they want to do the same thing. And then if there's some admonishment or some criticism or discipline, those are important things too. People have to learn, and that's how they do learn, is when they make mistakes. Gosh knows I have made plenty of mistakes in my life, but you don't do that publicly. You do that more privately. I think you spend some time with people and you let them feel good about themselves as they walk out the door, even though you've told them they've done something that isn't quite what you need and what they should be doing. So I think when it comes to leadership, those are probably some of the ways that I've operated and ensuring that people felt that they were being led properly. And when you lead people in a good way and they feel like there's something in it for them, they want to follow that lead, right? So, and that's how you're successful. You can't do it on your own. That's what people leadership is all about. It's just working together as a team.
Absolutely. And that feedback is so critical. Folks love being told that they're doing everything right and they're awesome, but if you're doing everything right and you're awesome, there's nowhere to improve, but we all have somewhere to improve. So you need to be open to that feedback as well.
Yep, that's exactly right. I would agree with that. Yep.
I want to key in on something else that you mentioned there. You talked about building the skills of your team. So you need to get the right team, you need to put them in the right seats, but you also need to help develop them and build their skills. And you didn't mention it, but I do know in your history, you had a big part in helping develop some of the top salespeople in Pepsi. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think, again, understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish. And in this case, it was convincing the customer that you had something that they needed, right? More so than some other guy might have had. And there's ways to do that, right? So we did spend some time really training our people on kind of the important elements of the sale, right? I mean, so it was making sure that the customer understood the need. Sometimes they don't, and it requires, I think, in large part, a salesperson, and a lot of us get blamed as salespeople for being big talkers, right? You need a salesperson that certainly knows how to talk, but they also need to learn how to be quiet from time to time, right? Ask the questions, right? And then once you've asked those questions, allow your customer to tell you what it is that's on their mind. And so that's one of the key things I think that that good salespeople who tend to be talkers, right, who tend to be, A-type personalities have to learn, right? So spend some time doing that and making sure they understood what the customer wanted. The other thing I always tried to teach my folks was it's important when you're in a sales presentation with someone to tell the story, right? There's got to be the story, right? And what is it? Well, basically, it starts with kind of what this need is, right? And then it gets into how is it that what you're offering is going to lead them down the path to where they want to be, right? So ultimately, there's a goal that they've got in mind. If they're convinced, and you can sell them on the idea that what you're bringing to them is going to get them to where they want to be, then that's a win. And that's what we're shooting for. It really has to be more than just you getting the sale, right? If you do that and then it ends up being a bad deal for the customer, they'll never come back to you again, right? Nor will they recommend you to others as well, because a lot of successful people get their business through a referral, right? But so those are some of the key elements, I think, as a sales leader that I try to impress upon my folks. The other thing is you got to keep a lot of irons in the fire, right? So it's don't put all your eggs in one basket. Make sure that you are aware that not every sale is going to happen, so that you have a lot of different opportunities that are ready to pop at any given point in time. We used to call that filling the funnel, right? So you dump all these opportunities in that funnel. Some will come out the bottom as success. Others won't. They'll drift away, and that's okay as long as you're always out there working hard. I used to tell my folks, it's important to put in a good day's work, but it's really good if you can put in the standard day's work in your 8 hours and then give yourself an extra hour a day to focus on things that are outside the norm that most individuals wouldn't take the time to do. And in the case of sales, that could be prospecting. It could be developing new leads. It could be working on a presentation that, is coming up in the weeks ahead, so you're ready and you're not hurried at the very end. So those are just a few of the aspects. I think it's important to have some classroom training. I think there are some things about selling that are required, and you have to understand what those things are. And so I think it's good to put people through that. And some of it, I think, becomes more just learning through experience. And there's nothing like going out with experienced salespeople that have been successful and watching them work. I love it. My wife always tells me, man, you're always thinking 3 and 4 steps ahead on everything, right? And I'll be saying like, well, if we're going to go in there, what are they going to say? And then if they say that, what are we going to say? And then and that's the way to do it, right? That's how you set yourself up for success. Is you'll be successful because you've been there before, even if it's only in your own mind,
I want to key in a little bit more on negotiation. A lot of salespeople listen to this, and a lot of buyers as well. And we think about that relationship of buyer and seller, but once that sale is made, you're negotiating with a lot more than just the person on the other side of that table, right? Especially when you're representing a company as large as PepsiCo. Could you talk about who you need to negotiate with, both internally and externally, and how negotiation plays into the entire process?
Sure. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I think part of the key to being successful as a salesperson is making sure that you have the product that you're going to sell in hand. And what I mean by that is, you've got to spend some time in advance. First of all, probably initially understanding what the customer wants, what their expectations are. And so a little bit of a discovery session with a customer is always a good idea. If you're in there trying to solve problems on the fly, it's gonna show, right? The customer's going to understand, okay, this guy's pitching me like he pitches everybody else he sees the first time, right? And that's probably not going to work, especially in a large sale. There may be some smaller sales where that's required. You only get one shot and that's the way it works. But If we're talking about a larger sale, it's first understanding what those needs are going to be. Then you got to go back to the company. In this case, when I was working for PepsiCo, and you got to make sure that you've got all of your constituents lined up, that everybody's in agreement that what you're trying to offer is going to be beneficial, not just to the customer, but also to your company. So, part of that is the financial side of things. What can I afford to do? What kind of pricing can I afford to offer that allows us to make the kind of revenue that we want? At the same time, gives the customer an attractive price or, an attractive financial arrangement if that involves marketing and advertising and the other elements of potential sales. You've got to work with your operations team to make sure that you can get the product that they need to them in the way they want to get it. So, for example, if a customer only uses a specific distributor, is that distributor willing to take your product on and move that to that customer? So those are things you got to do in advance. I used to work a lot with our marketing department. Once I understood what the customer was trying to do with their business, I needed to find a way not to, tack my product onto the back end of that, but to fit my product into what they were doing, right? So it's a matter of using your product in synergy with everything else they're trying to accomplish, right? So sometimes that does require a little bit of a marketing approach where you think about, okay, what can I bring along with my product that helps it to fit better into this customer's need, helps them to solve problems that they're dealing with in their world, right? So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in your own company or in your own organization before you ever actually spend time negotiating with the customer themselves. Once you're in front of the customer, it really is this idea of understanding what they're trying to accomplish, dialing back in on that on a regular basis, right? Making sure you're hitting the mark. Let them talk, right? Let them tell you. Explain what it is you're trying to accomplish. See if it fits their need. If it doesn't, you got to circle back around. There were times when I would go in with a 35-page presentation, and 2 pages in, I realized this isn't what they want. Right. So I had to kind of dial that back. And it's that I've seen salespeople go through the whole 35-page deck, and it's basically a waste of everyone's time. And the customer sees that you're not listening. Right. You're telling me things. You're not having a conversation with me. That's really in large part what negotiations are. It's a conversation about something that's going to ultimately be a win-win, something that allow in the end for them to have something they want and for you to get what you need as well, right? And they recognize that. Most customers know they're better off with a supplier that's happy with the deal because that deal will always work. They'll continue to get that supplier in and giving them more support because it's beneficial to both parties.
Yeah, and that goes back to that discovery that you were talking about. It's not about just trying to let the other side know what kind of value you're offering. It's about effectively asking questions to understand what really is important to them. Because if you bring that 35-page deck and it's full of stuff that they don't care about, then exactly like you said, you're just wasting everybody's time.
Sure.
It also is very interesting the way you laid that out. A lot of younger folks in their career or less experienced folks think of getting to a deal as, okay, I just got to negotiate with that party across from me. But especially in these larger organizations, you are having as many negotiations internally to get that internal stakeholder alignment as you are with the customer.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's harder to get that internal alignment than it is to get to the deal.
I think that's exactly right. We used to say that sometimes, that our biggest hurdle isn't the customer, it's getting the company where they need to be. In many cases, that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not. I mean, sometimes it's the company is probably focused in the wrong way. But assuming that they've got good intention and good people in all these roles, then ultimately, yeah, it's aligning there so that you have what you need when you go in to see the customer. It's really challenging to be in front of a customer and begin to get into this pitch and then realize partway through you can't give them what they're looking for because you have no authorization to do it. It doesn't leave you in the best light. You always want to be to the customer the guy with all the answers, right? I mean, and if it appears that, well, let me go back and check, and I've heard salespeople say that I have to go back and check with my manager, with my operations team. It kind of diminishes you in the customer's eyes. You're no longer the individual that is there to answer all their questions, right? You're just the guy that's the voice, of the company, and you don't really have any authority to make decisions. And it not to say you can't get a sale that way, but it's just not as easy, and you're probably not going to get as many.
We have a lot of young people that are listening to this podcast, and they would love to be able to even come close to having the career that you've had. What piece of advice would you give to young people that have similar career aspirations and want to achieve the things maybe that you've achieved?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. You'll find that the older you get and the longer you've been in the business world, the more you realize the most important thing you can do at that stage in the game is help younger people. As they continue to grow in their careers, it becomes kind of the most important part of your work, right? And as it should be. I mean, I got a lot of help from older and more experienced people when I was just getting started. So what I say is to young people is a number of things. What's most important of all, I think, is don't get too tied up in money and what you're making. Don't get too tied up in the financial package, the goodies and all of that, right? Because if you do it right at a young age, all that stuff's going to come. You're going to get all that eventually. What's most important when you're young is to experience as much as you can, to grow your skill set as much as you can. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you go down one path and one path only, you're probably going to be obviously a one-sided individual, right? You're only going to have one set of skills. I would recommend for younger people, when opportunities surface, even if sometimes they're kind of out of your wheelhouse, they don't feel like it's something that you necessarily feel you'd be good at right away. It's a good thing to do. At Pepsi, for example, I started in sales, but I ended up doing a couple of roles outside of sales. One of them was as a general manager. And so I got that operations background, right? That ability to understand better that there are many, many components that lead to success ultimately. So I would say don't look away from opportunities to grow your skill set. What you're basically doing as a young person, when I say young person, that's anyone from, a recent college graduate all the way up to probably 30, 35 years old. You're building your basket full of value, if you will, that you'll sell later on to get these big roles that we're talking about, right? So, and you'll be ready for them too. That's the other thing, right? It's not just to get the job. It's also being able to do it once you show up, right? So I think too many people today worry about, oh, my buddy's making 10 grand a year more than I am. Who cares, right? I mean, what's going to be most important is when the day comes when you decide you're going to retire, do you have what you need at that point in time to do that, right? And the way you're going to build to that is a lot of it's going to come at the back end of your career. Because why? Well, because you've earned it. You're worth it, right? People will pay for that value. They recognize the skill set. They understand the value. So I would say continue to learn. I would read a lot of business books. I would spend a lot of time with mentors. If you don't have one, go get one. Find somebody that when you look at them, you watch them work, you say, boy, that's the way I want to be. Well, there's a good way to get that way, and that's find out how they got there, right? Kind of what you're doing right now. I mean, it's important that you understand successful people don't get there by coincidence or by luck, right? They build that. So find out what their story was, not just one person, but numbers of people, right? I mean, it's one of the things I think young people are surprised to find is that folks that have been around a while, not only are they not bothered by someone coming and asking these questions of them, they actually like it. They want to be able to take what they've learned and bestow that, if you will, on somebody else. I mean, so I've told my children this. I've told all the people that work for me. I've told you, Nick. I mean, all the people that work for me at Pepsi that were willing to listen, and not everybody is. I think that's the other thing is be a good listener. You're going to hear a lot of things that are of no value, but if you listen carefully to people, you're going to pick up some gold nuggets that are going to be very valuable to you through your career. So be a good listener, especially when it's somebody that has ultimately been successful and is where you want to be in 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, some of the best advice I ever got is, especially when you're young and early in your career, when opportunity knocks, answer the door, because the wider that breadth of experience when you're younger, the stronger that foundation is going to be when you decide to specialize or move into something else as you move up that career ladder, as you could say.
That's exactly right. You never know when one of the skills you develop is going to come in handy for you. It happens a lot. And it could be in a whole different line of work, but it is quite amazing. A lot of the tools that you build when you become a good, strong business person and a business leader are leverageable anywhere, right? Anywhere in life, and that includes even with your family life. I mean, so learn while you're young. Spend time gathering skills. Meet with lots of people that know what they're doing and learn from them. Get involved in projects. Work on special projects. That extra hour a day can be used sometimes to develop and then work on a special project that can elevate you in the mind of somebody else. And it'll elevate you because you've learned something and you've delivered something, right? So there's lots of ways, I think, for young people to separate themselves from others. And that's really what we have to do. The pyramid gets tighter and tighter at the top. And so if you want to get up to the top of the pyramid, you really got to differentiate yourself from others that you're going to be competing with.
All right, Todd, thank you very much for that. I do have one last question for you, for our listeners. Do you have any personal or work related leadership or negotiation disaster stories where it went totally wrong and you were able to either find success out of it or really took away some strong learnings that you were able to apply to your future deals or your future success?
Sure. Don't we all, right? And I think probably, sad as it is, sometimes it's these disasters or failures that you come up against that really show your mettle. I mean, it differentiates those that are characters from those who have character, right? I mean, so how do you come through that? Failures are always tough. So have I had some? Well, sure. One in particular, I had a pretty large account. We'd had the account for a long time. And maybe my biggest failure here was that as we were negotiating a new agreement with them, with a large competitor, I may have taken the relationship that we had built with a couple of key people at the company for granted. I believe what happened, we did lose this account, by the way, and I think what happened was we believed that because we had a couple of key folks on our side, and they'd been on our side for a long time, that even though there were a few other folks that were new to the organization that had some power, they would not be able to outrun us, right? We believed we had the right people on our team. I guess that begs the question. So you had these folks on your side, you had other folks you didn't know about, or maybe you even knew they were somewhat hostile towards you. Why not try to win them over as well, right? And I would say that we didn't completely neglect those people, but we didn't do nearly enough to make sure we understood what they wanted and what was important to them. I think it almost became a point of a little bit of an animosity because they could see that we were relying on others and that we weren't coming to them and spending any time with them. And as I look back at it now, I think if we had spent just a little bit of time better understanding some of these more junior people that had still fairly high level positions, what their needs were, why they were considering another supplier, we probably would have been a lot better off. I don't know if we'd have won or not. I think we'd have had a lot better chance at it because in the end, I do think that the people that we had confidence in would have selected us, but they weren't willing to overrule the individuals that were making points for the other team, the other supplier, right? So I think really, you really have to get to know, especially in a big sale, the entire organization that you're dealing with, right? Sometimes we say from the break room to the boardroom. I mean, you got to know everybody, right? I mean, if you know all the folks that play a role and you understand their needs, you begin to understand the organization better. You're going to be much better served in the end. You can probably meet the needs of maybe, if not everybody, most of them better than we did, right? I think we did meet the needs of some of the folks, but it wasn't enough, right? I mean, so I'd say that's probably the lesson I learned was understand, listen, ask first of all, and listen to others in the organization, even beyond those that you consider to be the chief decision makers, because in the end, other people do have influence. And if you let that go, there's a good chance you're going to have happen to you what happened to me that time. We lost the business.
This is a lesson in self-reflection. I think many of us have failures. Many of us are going to fail again in the future. And it's very easy to say, oh, that wasn't my fault. I couldn't have done anything differently. But it's way more powerful if you look back through a lens of learning, through a lens of development, through a lens of building your own capability so that next time a problem like this comes up, you're going to approach it with a different mindset, with a different strategy, and come out successful next time.
I think that's exactly right. I think with every win, you want to celebrate those that helped you get there. with every loss, you want to take the greater responsibility on yourself and internalize that, right? What did we do wrong? Something didn't go the way it should. Even in a victory, sometimes you can look at the things you didn't do well, right, and be better. I mean, that's how you get from good to great, as Jim Collins would say. But in failure, certainly, when you've lost something, it is very important to go back and do the post-mortem, if you will, and understand, how did that happen? How can I avoid that in the future? And really, frankly, if you're a leader, how can I train my team so that they understand that? And the other thing is, I think this is key. Usually when you have a loss of that size, it's not any one individual that loses it. As a senior leader at the time, it hurt, that's for sure. But I think it probably hurt some of my team even more to have that happen. And so helping them to understand that though they played a role in that loss, it wasn't all their fault. You are their leader. You somehow let them down, and you need to lift them up and build them up, and help them to realize, hey, look, this is one failure amongst many, many wins, right? So there's wins ahead. Let's learn from this one and move on, and don't dwell on it. Frankly, just learn what you can and hold that close and use it the next time.
Todd, I can't thank you enough for your time. It has been a pleasure catching up, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Absolutely.
Real soon.
Well, I'm glad we reconnected. Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it.